Welcome to another episode of Called Bank Sports. The Jazz, excuse me, the Jazz are looking pretty good. They're third in the West, 8-4. Not angry with the start, not totally crazy happy about the start yet either. But this season has been kind of weird. Like the Jazz are kind of what we expected. Like that's why I'm not either way about it. But if you look around the league, there's a lot of stars having shooting problems. They're just not getting into the rhythms. The Washington Wizards are first in the East. If you look around the standings, like uh, the Lakers are having a tough time. Some of you probably predicted that, but things are kind of looking not at all how a lot of people expected them. It's still super early in the season, but is this a sign of things to come? And one thing that Nate brought up is that this might be due to the NBA is a lot more physical this season. And we saw that definitely in the Pacers game with the Jazz. There's been the news with Jokic and the Heat. Speaking of the Heat, the Jazz play the Heat, so they're another physical team that we might have to keep an eye out for stuff like that. But I don't know, Nate, what have you been seeing with this increased physicality? What do you think is causing it? Like, let's start that conversation.
So there's been a lot of discussion about the rule change to, when shooters kind of stick out their leg, or jump into guys and take what basically are unrealistic shots. And I feel like that's kind of something different entirely. But the NBA has talked a lot about time, and they had a lot of issues last year about games going really long. Like I can't remember what game it was specifically. I think it was the Suns Clippers, and the last minute or two of the game took like 30 to 40 real life minutes when it came down to reviews and things like that, which is not exciting basketball. And I know there's a lot of people who are a fan of getting it right, and if that takes 10 minutes of video review, they want that. And there are other people who are saying, hey, just stick with the call on the court. Let's just go. And that's part of the reason why the NBA changed changed the rule on out of bounds reviews in the last couple minutes of the game. But I think kind of what ended up happening is by saying, hey, let's try to shorten up these games, which I think we're both big fans of, because it's really nice when it's an 8 p.m. tip to have the game over before 10 instead of over at 10:30 or 10:40. But that change there has led to a lot of fouls that would be called not being called anymore. Like, for instance, when you had the big Gobert issue with the ejection and how he believes he got fouled, which I think is probably fair for that. But as a response after that, I mean, he was angry because of the more physical play and pulled Miles Turner down with him. That led to the Miles Turner shove, the hug fest, right? And then eventually them getting pulled apart. And in my opinion, after that, Rudy Gobert seemed kind of more calm and to get his cool back, but Turner was still losing his mind. Then you have Joe Ingles come in and take out a ref, incidentally, apparently, but I still don't know how that's an accident, but thankfully he's not being suspended. And Mitchell get him some water, so there was a lot of money lost there. But I think that's kind of what we're going to get if the NBA becomes more physical, and goes back more to a 90s style basketball. Maybe I obviously didn't watch ball in the 90s, but from what I hear, like things like this were more common. You're gonna have more heated altercations, more bad blood. So I'm really kind of expecting to see this continue, like to see more things like the Jokic incident earlier this week, and hopefully nothing as terrible as what happened with Jokic. Blind shots are definitely not good, and again, like Gobert should have been more of a grown up here. I mean, I'm not going to take that. I feel like the Jazz had lost the game anyway, but I'm not a fan of his actions here, and I'm not a fan of Joe and Donovan's actions either. But I mean, people are going to get heated on the court, and it's going to create an interesting kind of new dynamic in today's NBA.
Well, and what I want to say is, I think Ingles had the right idea. The ref didn't make the call, so go after the ref. Don't go after Turner.
No, the ref gets you a guaranteed suspension. If that's intentional, that's a suspension. You get another NBA player, and that's just a fine. Don't get suspended. Well, I don't know. Maybe Joe needs a game off to try to get back in a rhythm here, but maybe the Jazz just need a game off, but who knows?
Yeah, well, I think it's like I I kind of hope the game's more physical. Obviously, like you said, I don't want stuff like Jokic. Like I think that was kind of insane. I don't think anyone intended that to happen. But like, and physicality doesn't mean fights. Like I don't want basketball to turn into hockey.
Yeah.
More physicality will probably lead into more of that, which I guess we can talk about that. But I think that physical basketball for a long time, it like that's one thing that I don't like it when like players like Shaq or Charles Barkley say, "Oh, the game's soft," and like they could never play when we played. Because I think players like Steph Curry, Kevin Durant would be great in any era, and they just adjust to the rules.
Yeah.
Jerry West was still great back when he played, and I'm sure it was a little rougher back then. Maybe not '90s rough, but I think that like last year there was a lot of talk of our centers dead, especially well maybe before last year, before the Heat made it to the championship against the Lakers in the bubble. A lot of people were talking about our centers useless in the league; they can't do anything. Adding physicality back in adds that usefulness for centers, which as the Jazz are set up, Gobert's not the biggest bruiser, but he's a big center. He's a great center, and I think that's going to play in the Jazz favor. I think having that toughness, like the Heat culture that I have set up, uh, I don't know. For me, you guys may like the just taking threes and the whole finesse play. I think the physicality makes it a little bit more fun. As much fun as it is to see players go off, I would rather see the scores come a little bit down and be a little bit more favorable to defense. Because there's sometimes when you're watching your favorite team or you're rooting for a team, most of the people on this channel, it's the Jazz. um, and you're just playing and you're just like, our defense can't do anything because the rules don't allow it. So I think the rule change did something to like, I know Nate, you mentioned that you don't think it's necessarily the rule change. I think the rule change at the very least didn't like it made it go to physicality maybe a little faster than it would have otherwise.
Yeah, I do wonder if it just stopped the refs from calling all ticky-tack fouls. But to your comment on the physicality, whether or not it's here to stay, I don't think it's here to stay. And I think we're going to see it get toned back, whether it's this season or next season. I think it's going to happen and this is open to discussion, but how much of, ticky-tack three-point fouls ended up coming into play because of Kawhi Leonard's injury? Like, yeah, now you have
Mm-hmm.
a flagrant foul if you land in the landing space, but that really leads to defenders not knowing how to play the three-point shot, especially adding that into a concern. And so what's going to happen when, because of this physicality, like Markieff Morris, what if he had been hurt a lot worse? And to be very cynical, what's going to happen when a star player gets hurt because the game is more physical? Like, what's going to happen when you have when you have oh, come on. I literally just lost the name. Hawks starting point guard.
Trae Young.
Trae Young. Thank you. I wanted to say Trey Lyles, and I knew that, and Trey Burke, but that was
Close
just
enough.
the Jazz side coming out. Trae Young. What's going to happen when he gets hurt on a physical play? Like, what's going to happen when Luka's out for like a season because the game's more physical? And I think that's why the NBA has moved away from physicality, is because, like, I mean, we're getting here in the next few years where Donovan Mitchell, Trae Young, Luka, they're going to have opportunities to possibly sign, deals that are worth $500 million. Like with the new TV deal here in a year or two, like contracts are going to go through the roof. And what's going to happen to Mavs games? Like, people aren't going to watch Mavs games if Luka's out. Like, what is there to watch? I mean, I don't want to attack your team right there, Dale, but like, what's there to watch on Dallas if Luka's all of a sudden out for a year?
Yeah. And well, this is an interesting conversation to have because like it's kind of weird to think, but I feel like basketball maybe not super physical, but it was a lot physical for it's only been like the last 5 years or less that it's been a lot less physical, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because like Steph Curry, he grew up in he came up in the league, not grew up, but he came up in the league when it was a lot more physical, and he had a lot of smaller injuries. I don't think it was, and like what happened from it is like even in 2016, when the Warriors kind of, well, I guess it was before 2016. I don't, whatever year it was when the Warriors really started breaking out, he had figured out how to stay healthy. He worked through that. So I think it's not like you do risk that with more physicality. Hopefully, I don't know. I hope there's a solution that can allow defenders to play defense
Yeah.
without risking major injuries.
Yeah.
Because obviously you don't want someone just straight up pushing people, but when you get in the post, there needs to be allowed a little bit more contact than there is, and this has been kind of a back and forth thing for a long time, because I know in the 2000s, early 2010s, there was that the whole blocking foul was a big thing where because the Euro step was becoming a lot more popular, the ball handler gets to control what direction they go into. They go.
Yeah.
And so if you as a defender aren't planted and they decide they're going right, but then the Euro to left, and that's where you are, and they run into you and take the layup, that same thing where the was happening back then, it was just down in the paint, not at the 3-point line. So I don't know. It's interesting to look at the history of basketball and how it changes and how those rules change. But at least preference wise, I hope there's a way to find more physicality. Obviously, without there needs to be a happy medium without career-ending injuries to star players. Obviously, that's not a good thing, but I think physicality, like defense, needs to be allowed to be played. And at times, I feel like in the past couple seasons, the other team had the ball, and when the other player was hot, it was just impossible to do anything because you can't make contact with them ever.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see where things go, since like what Jokic did, not okay. But I mean, what Morris did in that game to incite Jokic, not okay. Gobert, totally in the wrong here. Turner, in the wrong. And I get that all of these are like such in the moment things, like they are happening when they're happening. And I mean, Gobert didn't really have time to think when he grabbed Turner, you know? And Turner had a bit more time to think, but still not a lot when he bumped Gobert. And then again, Gobert had a bit more time, but still not a lot. And seeing these issues, like Gobert can't get ejected in this game. Like it was, I think, a 9 or 10 point game at this point with 4 minutes left. And the Jazz were not playing a good game, and chances are they lose. But then once you have Joe Ingles, Donovan Mitchell, and Rudy Gobert all ejected, what are the chances that they win? I mean, it basically goes down to 0 at that point.
Well, I can tell you from watching the end of the game, it's 0.
Yes, at that, you know, I do always kind of think about that. Like, we look at these games and we give them a percentage chance of winning going in, but at the end, you know, it's 0 or 100. You know, I mean, oh shoot, that's what happens. So I think it'll be interesting to see where the NBA goes from here. I'm excited to see it, and I hope that we don't have any more Jokic incidents. You know, and I feel like that's just a situation where Jokic is big and strong and needs to remember that. And also, you can't be hitting people in the back. Like, that's just not okay. That's how.
That's
like,
not even allowed in the UFC.
we
You
don't
can't
need
punch someone in the back of the head.
we don't need blindside blocks, you know, or anything like that in the NBA. But again, you also just, it's, I mean, I'll admit, it's kind of fun in the moment to be like, oh yeah, they're getting heated. But what if this happens, you know, in game 7? Like, Gobert needs to keep his cool. And so do Donovan and Joe. And I know Donovan and Joe are just, you know, trying to be there for their man. And there's team camaraderie there. And maybe it's best for the team if that's what happens. But, like, this game obviously didn't matter. But at the same time, like, the Jazz have lost 3 of their last 4. And obviously, things are just whack with the entire league, like you said. Like, the Wizards are winning the East right now. Don't expect it to stay that way, but that's what the standings say. So
Kuzma for MVP, like
that shows you what happens when you trade one guy who plays solo ball for a bunch of guys who play team ball. There's some decent changes there. Should have given the Warriors more credit in our preseason predictions there. Sorry, the Wizards more credit in our preseason predictions, but it's just going to be
we should have given the
interesting.
Warriors more credit too.
Oh yes, I strongly considered. I'm like I don't bet, but like they really think Vegas really thinks the Warriors are going to win like 48 games. That's not going to happen. Like they don't even have Klay Thompson. And now they're sitting here at 11-1, just needing to win 38 of the next 70, like just barely over 500, and they're getting Klay back. I mean, the Warriors, man, it's an insane year, and really hoping that the Jazz can pick up a win today against the Heat and kind of get back on track. But I don't know if that's going to happen. And then we're sitting with the Jazz 8-5, and they're trying to, get back in their rhythm and overcome the changes that teams are making to beat them.
Yeah, and the good news is, I think, and this might contribute to some of the physicality, but in years past, there's always been super teams that people feel like, no matter what happens, especially with LeBron James, how ridiculous he was on that run of how many years in a row he made it to the finals, where the East was just like, well, we'll play good basketball, but maybe there's one team a year who thinks they can compete with that. Right now, except for the Nets, if they stay healthy, but even they're short with Kyrie Irving, so they're not really healthy. They're still playing pretty good. The whole league is wide open. All the decent teams feel like they have a chance to make a splash in the playoffs. And so, I think that makes for exciting basketball. Even if the Jazz kind of have a disappointing season, fall to like a 4 or 5 seed, I think if everything's ready for the playoffs, they could still make a run to the finals. That's kind of how competitive the league is right now. So I'm excited to watch this play out.
And honestly, if I had to choose the 1 seed or being guaranteed that the Jazz were on a hot streak going into the playoffs, I would definitely choose the hot streak going into the playoffs. Like, if they're hitting their threes come playoff time and they're able to get these switching defenses figured out, then they're going to have a great chance to make the finals. So thank you guys so much for watching wherever you're at. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. We really appreciate it. Please tune in to the most popular video site on the web for our live stream tonight after the Miami Heat game. And thanks again for watching, and go Jazz!